Good afternoon, America. Welcome to the stream. I am Secession, future President of the United States. Hello from Boston. I was trying to let the, see, because now it's going to start in 1 minute. I probably should just start like 2 or 3 minutes early so this stupid ad thing can kick off and we don't have our immediate stream interrupted. Hello, Oshun. Now, remember how on Friday of last week I said we're going to infiltrate the Project 2025 and wait for, the outcome to see if we get accepted? And then what, on Tuesday or Wednesday we did get accepted, but I was reading the terms and conditions and I was a little iffy on doing it. Well, I read those terms and conditions again while we weren't on stream, while I could actually, digest them, and it only talks about the database, folks. It does not talk about the training. So, there might be wibbly-wobbly, whatever, but there wasn't explicit terms and conditions for the training. So guess what we are, in fact, going to do? Day one of infiltrating Project 2025. I would say that means we aren't going to be talking about anything else, but we will be talking about Project 2025 as a overarching focus for the stream. I apologize in advance. The AC in this apartment is failing, and it's causing me to have some severe issues with like breathing and all that fun stuff. Also of worthy mention, STL Fitted has followed the stream, so thank you for the follow. And I think that catches us up, which is awesome. So other things that we want to discuss today, because, I mean, the thing is, like, Project 2025, a lot of the progressive movement is actually calling it a conspiracy, a smoking gun, another Russiagate, whatever. But it isn't. It isn't, because I am actually in it. I am actually looking at it, and I am actually telling you that this is radicalization of the conservative demographic. And the fact that this is allowed to exist, and although there have been hacks to reveal the database, I don't know so much that the training has. Of course, the manifesto itself is live and running amok on the internet too. And we're seeing things like on page X, Y, and Z and da-da-da-da-da. There is, this explicit thing happening that is horrendous. And we will be seeing that too, I'm sure, in the training. Now, since we're doing 3-ish hour streams, I do want to say that the overall trainings are about the length of an actual college course if you were to take a class every single day. Which means some of the courses are only 30 minutes long, some are an hour, some are 5 hours. So how we end up breaking those up, I'm not entirely certain yet. We might just stream until the darkness comes and we have some blinding lights to keep us through the night. But suffice to say, we will be talking about current events. We will be highlighting different issues. But we are definitely going to be infiltrating Project 2025 as much as we can. Or for as long as we can. Because, hell, we might get found out and then too little too late, right? On that note, it does look like the news today is mostly Biden. We get it. He's old. He needs to drop out. He should drop out. It would be in the best interest of the party if he dropped out, but he doesn't want to. So, honestly, I think that's a waste of oxygen to discuss at all. There's better things to do with our time. Palestine has continued to be under attack by Israel. The United States of America continues to aid and abet genocide by funding and arming and supplying Israel with weapons. I'm not aware of any breaking news, anything more explicit happening beyond atrocities galore. But in general, I would argue that with the Democratic focus trying to push the narrative on Ukraine, we can also see that that conflict doesn't show any signs of waning either. And in the international community, it is beginning to harm those countries' administrations as the longer this drags on. And of course, Putin does whatever Putin wants. So I would say in terms of international news, as far as that goes, as president, it looks like that hasn't changed really. It does seem like the most dominating theme is Joe Biden refusing to drop out and Project 2025 being dismissed, being censored by an extremely conservative-oriented fact-checking group on Facebook and other social media. So we can very clearly see that Project 2025 is exactly what we think it is. So, without further ado, I've already watched some of these videos, and there's quizzes. I kinda don't know if we should just start over from scratch. Because again, I kind of want to get through as many as possible, just in case we do get found out. But suffice to say, they have a test, and then they have course material. And so the course material is recommended readings, and it's just this reading list of the most conservative nonsense you've ever read in your life. As far as the quiz, here's the quiz. The American Revolution led to constitutional government, so that's actually factual. What fundamentally defines America? A particular geographic place, the statement of principles, a particular people and way of life, the rule of law framework defined by the Constitution. Again, factually correct, but it's the context in which it was delivered that makes it very iffy. The goal of American conservatism is to recover, restore, and conserve America. That is a theme throughout all of these lessons, and we will absolutely get into that. The fundamental truths proclaimed in the Declaration of Independence are: all are created equal, all possess certain fundamental rights, the legitimate government exists to secure right. Remember, legitimate, key word. That the people have the right to alter or abolish their government and institute new government. Remember that one. True or false, the American constitutional system is designed to secure fundamental rights, control political power, and preserve liberty by creating a framework of law by which the sovereign people govern ourselves. So this is the argument for small government and those intents. The Constitution is built upon the bedrock of the rule of law, is intended to secure the rights, is a constitution of limited and delegated powers, is incompatible with modern bureaucratic government that violates the consent of the governed. And this is where the insidious nature already begins with the quiz. The modern bureaucratic government, that's just, again, that's hyperbole with the phrasing, and that's taking an extremely biased approach because, again, they're banning books. They are limiting the rights of LGBT and Black Americans and other POC, but they want to call, providing for healthcare, the road system, medical for all that fun stuff as bureaucratic government. Anything that infringes upon their belief system is bureaucratic government and violates the consent of the governed. Meanwhile, it is the governed who elect the members of Congress who pass these laws into existence. A key characteristic of conservatism is prudence, to be clear, consistent, and unwavering on fundamental principles, as well as adaptive, innovative, and flexible in policy and practice in support of those principles. This is where the radicalization really starts to get built. It presents conservatism as this honorable thing, as this keystone of intellectualism that is adaptive and innovative, not regressive and destructive, right? It's using all of the precise wordage that'll make you feel inspired and glad to be part of something. And then finally, the root source of our recovery as a country and as conservatives is not found in the first principles of America, and America is not worth conserving. So again, that's false. They do want to conserve America, and they do believe that there are these first principles. That is a theme that is repeated over and over and over again. And that is the natural rights, and that nature's God exists to grant those rights, those certain unalienable rights, unless, of course, you're a woman, you're Black, you're queer. So, back to the course, we're going to go to the next lesson. Now, again, that's the next part of it, I see. So, I then started watching the history of the conservative movement. And honestly, I think this is something we should watch again from the beginning, largely because I didn't watch it all the way through yet. I only got 22 minutes into it. So I think we can go ahead and start from the beginning. This is literally how it
Conservatives exist to conserve the ideals of the American founding, its first principles, and the framework and institutions that made it possible.
Now, this
in the
is
eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle.
In America, we understand that a nation.
Oh, but Trump has nothing to do with Project 2025.
As it is striving.
He is literally being quoted and elevated in the course material.
Only a few
and it's the
generations
beginning of
have
each
been
and every
granted the
single
role
video.
of defending freedom in its hour of maximum
It's
danger.
literally the
This
intro.
great
post to
nation will
everything.
endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper.
Whether we go forward together with courage or turn back to policies that weakened our economy, diminished our leadership in the world, America's future will be in your hands.
So in the future, we will skip this, but this is the beginning of every single video.
Hi, my name is Christopher Malagisi, and I'm very pleased and honored to be presenting the history of the conservative movement on behalf of the Heritage Foundation's 2025 Presidential Transition Project in my own personal capacity. My day job is serving as Executive Director of Outreach for Hillsdale College's Washington, D.C. campus, and I was previously CPAC Director and Director of External Relations for the American Conservative Union, and was also editor-in-chief of the Conservative Book Club, which is a division of Salem Media. But for many years, I taught history of the conservative movement as an adjunct instructor at American University in Washington, D.C., and was the education director of Conservatism 101, a project of the Leadership Institute, where I put together an online course based on my course at American University about the political and philosophical history and influence of the conservative movement, one of the first of its kind. Putting a course like that together would have been impossible without the pioneering work of two leading historians, Dr. Lee Edwards and Dr. George H. Nash. Dr. Edwards currently serves as Distinguished Fellow in Conservative Thought at the Heritage Foundation, and much of the presentation I'm about to give today is based on his many published works, most importantly from his seminal work, The Conservative Revolution, the Movement That Remade America, which is one of the primary texts that I used in my classroom, which is an overview of conservatism from the years 1945 to 2000. The other historian is Dr. George H. Nash, whose groundbreaking book, The Conservative Intellectual Movement in America Since 1945, another of the textbooks that I used, was also incredibly influential in mine and much of the conservative movement's understanding of itself.
I know where you're watching a video, and I know this.
Dr. Edwards
is it hard
and
to hear?
Dr. Nash are the
It's hard.
giants whose shoulders we stand on.
Is it hard to hear for you guys? Because it is hard to hear for me.
So many others whom I don't have enough time to list, but who also had a great influence in my own understanding of this great and important movement I've worked in for nearly 2 decades. So what is the conservative movement? How did it begin? Why was it even needed? And what are conservatives inherently trying to conserve? And how did the conservative movement, rooted in Barry Goldwater's catastrophic defeat to Lyndon...
Okay, Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater, again, do you remember Hillary Clinton saying she was a Barry Goldwater girl? A Goldwater girl? That's the same exact Goldwater. A apparently conservative icon who was one of the first to really shoehorn and advocate for this conservative movement. And the fact that, oh yeah, no. This is exactly what it is, pop culture. And literally, this is Project 2020. In fact, I see where I might have made a slight mistake. People might not believe that this is real. This is literally Project 2025. This isn't fake. This isn't some video on YouTube. This is Project 2025, the Presidential Administration Academy. We are literally watching the indoctrination videos, course material, the certificate ones, by the way, the ones where you will actually get some sort of a credential for having completed these. And we're watching the video partially because I want it to be shown, but partially because once you start really hearing what they have to say, it is so biased, it is so insidious, and it is very clearly radicalization. According to the manifesto, public school kids, not private school kids, have to take a military entrance exam, old enough to do military, not old enough to vote. No, you're absolutely right. The manifesto is separate, of course. That's the wish list of what they want to do. This training is how to brainwash and radicalize conservatives into doing it through the bureaucratic political processes. Also, how to get people elected. Also, how to campaign. Also, how to message and advertise and market conservatism. This is literally the radicalization program for the conservative movement. Indoctrinating books while saying boo to indoctrinating books. Right. No, you're absolutely right. That's what we're up against here.
1964 presidential election.
So you can hear this. I'm going to turn it up a little bit because I'm having a hard time.
16 years later. This presentation will be a narrative.
Now remember,
analyzing the
I got 22
rise of
minutes
the
deep into
conservative
this.
Movement, primarily from the early progressive era to the Reagan Revolution, exploring how what largely started as a marginalized movement of ideas became a
they
powerful
consider
political
the
force
Reagan administration
that
a
has changed
revolution,
not only America,
and listen to how they
but the
define
world.
progressivism. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. Oh no, that's
Quite
the
literally,
thing.
The word
Listen to
conservative
him.
means to
Listen
conserve.
to him.
The word conserve comes from the Latin word conservare, meaning to keep together. Con meaning together, and servere
bring in
meaning
a anti-
to keep. So essentially, conservative means to keep together. And according to the dictionary, conservative means to keep, preserve, keep intact, guard, and protect from harm or destruction.
Do you see how they're defining themselves as protectors, as defenders of the Constitution, of the Declaration of Independence, of the American dream, of the Founding Fathers' ideals? I'm telling you, this is a lot more insidious than I pledge allegiance to the flag or singing the national anthem every Friday at school. Just listen.
So if one was
I mean,
curious,
comment, of course,
one might
but
ask,
listen.
What are American conservatives inherently trying to conserve, to keep together, and protect from harm or destruction? The answer would be American exceptionalism. The idea that America is unique in the annals of human history and that our founding in 1776 was based on certain first principles and ideas that were, in one sense, revolutionary, and in another, based on thousands of years of human history,
absolute
experience,
keywords,
achievement, acquired knowledge, customs, and traditions. Russell Kirk, the great American philosopher and traditionalist scholar, said that America was the culmination or benefactor of Western civilization, that it had inherited the best of the great Western traditions, including that of ancient Jerusalem, Athens, Rome, London, and Philadelphia, where our Declaration of Independence was declared and our Constitutional Convention was held. America, at its founding, personified these ideas. Certainly in our governing documents, there was a reverence to individual liberty, consent of the governed, freedoms of religion and conscience, speech.
Again, do you hear him? Freedom of religion, conscience, and speech. And what are they literally doing? Trying to create a white nationalist nation. They are literally trying to dismantle the First Amendment in its entirety. Meanwhile, if you were to just watch this in a bubble and take these courses, you're like, this motherfucker's spitting.
Private property and a respect for civil society and its institutions, and that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The articulation of such ideas were the byproduct of the Enlightenment, and certain philosophers in particular, John Locke in Natural Rights, Charles Montesquieu in The Separation of Powers, Adam Smith in Capitalism, and William Blackstone in The Common Law. Much of these ideas could be traced back to ideas from antiquity and the Middle Ages, including those espoused by Aristotle, Cicero, Thomas Aquinas, and many others. Conservatives exist to conserve the ideals of the American founding, its first principles, and the framework and institutions that made it possible, and the constitutional republic that enabled the greatest experiment in human history and liberty. So for about the first 125 years or so of the American Republic, or roughly around from the founding to the late 1800s, early 1900s, much of America was governed by this constitutional framework of traditional checks and balances, separation of powers, federalism, and the federal government playing a limited role in society.
And remember, children, remember that he just said limited government, limited all this fun stuff, right? It was literally on page, what? Well, it was like page 32, right? So 54 or something in the... No, not 150. Taking the reins of government. In the manifesto. In the manifesto. Section 1. Not 7 or 375Z. Section 1. Taking the reins of government. I cannot make this up, folks. This is exactly how radicalization occurs. You are presented with a message that is reasonable, that is sound, that plucks on the heartstrings of patriotism, honor, and duty. And then the reality is this. It's the radicalization. The taking over of whatever you want. This is literally the subversion of what our government stands for, what it actually is, right? So, again, I think it was page 32. Oh, geez, that scrolled much faster than I anticipated. Let's see. So I think it was page 32. Right there. Right here. Look at this. The Office of Presidential Personnel, identifying political personnel, both actively through recruitment and passively by fielding resumes, vetting, making recommendations, identifying programmatic political workforce, maintaining, training, playing bad cop in a way other White House officials can't, serving as a personal link between orgs and the executive branch. The OLA, the Office of Legislative, Office of Legislative Affairs. There's the first one, which we're finding it because I don't remember where it was. Office of the White House Counsel will now fall under the thumb of the president, to include the DOJ. But the audacity here is that, and we can kind of go backwards a little bit.
Constitutional framework of traditional checks and balances, separation of powers, federalism, and the federal government playing a limited role in society.
Now, those were his words. Where on earth is that felt in this paragraph on page 60 of 922? I'm going to help calm you down. The opposite of what I did yesterday by telling you Utah's court struck down gerrymandering by the Utah GOP. That's outstanding news. That is outstanding news. I'm not riled up. Maybe it seems like I'm riled up, but I'm highlighting that Project 2025 really is as dangerous as people are saying it is. The manifesto is one thing, and it's terrifying. This is the wet dream that they're fighting for. And then this is how they are luring conservatives into fighting for that manifesto by filling them with ideology and feelings of patriotism and defense and honor and blah, 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 blah. Exactly. And then you have the left, and you have the left saying, oh, it's just a false flag. You have Democrats saying, look, this is what Trump wants to do, completely missing the point. And then you got Biden saying, well, at least I will have tried even if I lose. It's like, no, motherfucker. If you lose, Not only do we get the manifesto, which is this, but then these chuckleheads will have trained an army of political workers to facilitate, enable, empower, and carry it out. Well, they couldn't because the Constitution has checks and balances and protections. Cool. The Supreme Court is already under the thumb of the Heritage Foundation, is already bought and paid for. It's in their pocket, as can be seen by the very fact that they they overturned the Chevron Doctrine and went against the SEC and went against the EPA. This is, when I say this is happening right now, this is what I mean.
So as to allow for individual liberty to thrive, so man
do
can
you see
pursue
how
their own happiness
individual
for
liberty
what
to
was
thrive?
understood.
What part of there? I don't have this. Noted, annotated, or whatever. But there's, I mean, okay, individuality, right? Is that going to work? Can I do control find from here? Shit, I cannot. Well, that's unfortunate. Okay. Point is, like on page 594 was one that I think was specifically mentioned on the internet. So let's get ourselves down there a little bit. And I know when I was doing Control F and I found the LGBT. Oh, here we go. Union transparency. Private sector unions must file detailed financial information with the DOL. Mind you, that they must file information with the DOL, but they also want to dismantle the Department of Labor. Again, it's contradictory in the same exact way the Bible's contradictory. It says, thou shalt not kill, and then immediately in the story after and before, it was the Israelites murdering whatever tribe and literally raping their the surviving wives and daughters and taking them as their own. Amends the labor law to allow EIOs at large, publicly traded corporations to elect a non-voting supervisory member of their company's board of directors. It reforms NLRA to prohibit informal worker management cooperative organizations like work councils. So it's getting rid of S-Corps. Creates an employee involvement organization to facilitate voluntary cooperation on critical issues like working conditions, benefits, and productivity. Meanwhile, it's dismantling OSHA. Like, I feel like we could just type a number in here, like 325. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, among this administration and the people of this country, has embarked on another historic journey transforming the food system as we know it, from farm to fork and at every stage along the supply chain. Does not need to transform this food system or develop a national plan to intervene. Instead, it should respect American farmers. One of the most important lessons learned is how critical it is to remove barriers in the food supply chain, not to increase them. Meanwhile, they are trying to deregulate what chemicals they can put in our food and what chemicals they can use on our crops. Oh my goodness. If Team Red wins, we then got to have faith that for the next 1,460 days that his horror show will never be put into law. But that's the thing. It will. And I'm not saying this as like a sky is fallen. I'm not saying this as like, secession is crying. Well, this is already happening. I cannot emphasize and stress that point enough. Project 2025 is already happening. It is already underway. The training, the infrastructure, the messaging, the radicalization, no less. And SCOTUS dismantling the federal agencies. This is currently happening. With a Republican administration, it gets accelerated. That is the only difference. Under a Democratic administration, it is already in the process of. Under a Republican administration, it gets accelerated much faster. They want you not to pay attention that what they want done cannot be done by dismantling or depowering the very things that they want done. Exactly. They're banking on the stupidity of people, which in this day and age, people are not informed. And as we can see, even on the left, it's just a conspiracy, a false flag. People are so quick to dismiss something that is blatantly obvious in front of their eyes, right? This is blatantly obvious. We could literally throw a dart at any page in this manifesto and it reeks of crimes against the Constitution, the people of the United States, a conspiracy to overthrow and undermine. Like, the sheer amount of criminal activity that is just outlined in that manifesto and what it actually achieves is breathtaking. Well, then, as much as it stinks, this has to be front and center in the next debate. Absolutely. Assuming Biden can resurrect himself enough to actually have a coherent word or two to string together. Or, hopefully, we can get somebody else. And at this point, honestly, I don't care. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's Gavin Newsom. I don't care if it's AOC. I don't care if it's Harris. I don't even care if it's Hillary Clinton, honestly. But it's got to be somebody else than Biden. It's got to be somebody else than Biden. I'm obviously not advocating for Hillary. Let's just be clear on that. But this isn't going to work. As it currently stands, I'm going to have to use Excel because I don't know how to calculate days from the top of my head from today, because we don't use that type of timekeeping. So January 20th, 2025 is the inauguration day of the President of the United States. Today is July 11th. So if we subtract January 20th from 2020, that is 193 days. If Biden remains the Democratic nominee for president, we have 193 days to prepare for the inevitability that this comes to fruition. We have 193 days. 193 days. And then after that inauguration, it'll take 180 days to, apparently 180 days to carry out everything on this agenda. And this is the messaging that they're using to radicalize and disseminate this information to conservatives.
It was not always perfect, and at times this was challenged, and rightfully so.
Just keep listening.
America had to fight a civil war for the fulfillment of promises made in our Declaration of Independence to enslaved people, and it took another 100 years to achieve their full civil rights.
Do you see? I can't make this up. 7 minutes. Here, let's play that again.
America had to fight a civil war for the fulfillment of promises made in our Declaration of Independence to enslaved people, and it took another 100 years to achieve their full civil rights.
Did you hear what I just heard? The Project 2025 conservative movement is taking credit for ending slavery and granting civil rights equality. The conservatives are literally trying to claim ownership of granting the freedom to slavery and then the civil rights. That doesn't matter. In this training, in this course that you can see right up here, right here, I am not making this up. This is literally the window. This is literally the website. I cannot make this up. They are trying to take credit for the civil rights movement and the end to slavery. They are disingenuously, of course, disregarding segregation, Jim Crow laws, and all this other fun stuff, where it was, again, conservatives beating the drum. And in fact, I believe it wasn't until 2014 until the last school district in America was desegregated. And it was in a conservative school district. So when I tell you that this is not only real, that this is actually happening, that this is underway, and that these trainings subvert and completely mischaracterize the course of history for their bias, and that leads into, of course, radicalization, I am not making this up. Let's play it again.
Fight a civil war for the fulfillment of promises made in our Declaration of Independence to enslaved people, and it took another 100 years to achieve their full civil rights.
They are literally trying to take credit for ending slavery and civil rights. Again, not making this up. I wish I were. This is dangerous. This is beyond scary. Beyond scary. This is literally rewriting history, painting it in a way that seems patriotic and democratic and all the other fun words to encourage vulnerable conservatives to participate in this program to facilitate the growth and process of the entire 922-page manifesto. And according to the furry gay hackers, they have a large database of individuals involved in that. And by the way, many of those IP addresses were found to be in China, one of the places that is admonished in the manifesto, but of course amongst their most vocal proponents in the first place, right? Anti-China rhetoric, pro-America. American exceptionalism was a phrase actually used in this training, no less. This is how, and honestly, there's an hour and 3 minutes of this, and I stopped at 22 minutes, and they were talking about how to organize a political movement within that 22 minutes, okay? I'm telling you, if there was ever a time to wake up, now would be the time. If there was ever a time to take something in the news seriously, it is, in fact, Project 2025. Time to prop my phone up in the buggy while Secession is playing in background while I shop. Yep. Put it on speaker so the people in Arkansas can hear, because they need to know that their lives, their liberties, their civil rights are also in jeopardy. If you think right now the workforce is difficult, that finding a job is difficult, to pay rent is difficult, that our food supply is expensive but also poisoning us, that healthcare is inaccessible, that childcare is inaccessible, all these other fun stuff that even conservatives care about, with this manifesto in effect, it will make everyone's lives exponentially more difficult. I can promise you that. Okay, so he is saying that slavery was guaranteed and that it was also good to end it via their doing. No, what he was saying is that the Declaration of Independence promised everyone should have the rights and freedoms to exist, essentially, right? And he's saying that the conservatives fought the Civil War to guarantee those rights. The same Civil War that conservatives fought on behalf of states' rights to contain and allow to continue slavery. They then also, in the same breath, claim ownership and ownership and credit for the Civil Rights Act, which they also fought against vehemently. It's all in the small print. They don't want you using a magnifying glass on. They can hear you. Trust me, I'm getting looks. Okay, but let me reiterate. The South will rise again is the #1 Southern state Confederacy rallying cry. The South will rise again. Slave rights. The right to slavery. And in this video, we'll play it again for posterity.
America had to fight a civil war for the fulfillment of promises made in our Declaration of Independence to enslaved people. And it took another 100 years to achieve their full civil rights. But overall,
that's coming from Project 2025, the curriculum. Meanwhile, the manifesto is trying to roll all of that back. So again, it's not only contradictory. Not only is it contradictory, but it is also insidious in its delivery. It is taking credit where the exact opposite is what occurred. But that's not really what the Civil War was about. That's the argument people have used, and it shows their lack of understanding of it. Well, the Civil War might not have been over slavery, except it was. It 100% was. It was in the Confederate Constitution that slavery shall be maintained and upheld. And among other things, right? I'm shooting, Nasty looks back. I'm the defense. I mean, let them listen. Let them listen to the falsehoods that are being spewed.
Overall, even throughout these and many other challenges, American citizens and our country's leaders generally respected and revered the Constitution, its processes, and accumulated wisdom, and when needed, would prudentially amend it. And they've done so 27 times.
Oh shit, I'm not in the...
It was not until the
My
early
apologies.
20th century that that wisdom would be challenged by forces who believed in a fundamental transformation of America. Enter the progressives.
Now, I really need you to listen to this. I really need you to pay attention to this part right here.
The progressives believed that America was not meeting the challenges of the times, that our legislative process was too slow and not reactionary enough to deal with the great challenges and innovations spawned by the Industrial Revolution and the Gilded Age. These challenges included widespread
Let them
poverty,
know it's
poor
secession.
working conditions,
Or
rampant
Sam Ronan.
urbanization
Honestly,
and
you can give them
immigration,
my name. I
and
don't
innovations
care.
in
Give
technology,
them my name.
transportation, media, and education. But what made the progressives different from previous quote-unquote reform movements was their direct assault on the foundations of American constitutionalism and their desire to uproot it. They also believed that our rights were not natural and based on some fixed or immutable truths, but that rights could only be attained through boundless governmental action, centralized planning, and large, whole-scale policy experimentation, which would largely be overseen by a denizen of scientific and technocratic administrators in the form of an over-encompassing, bureaucratic administrative state.
You see how they're explaining holding industry accountable, holding government accountable, enabling different things like the Department of Labor to exist, Social Security to exist, OSHA to exist, unions to form, the Department of Education. All of these departments, all of these cabinet positions are what he is lambasting in that statement. He is saying anything that deals with administering the country and carrying out its laws, which again, these agencies are written into existence by Congress, so they are constitutional and have a constitutional mandate. He is saying that is in violation of the Constitution. But again, we've already seen it. They want to recreate their these different bodies in their own image. So Commodity Credit Corporation is generally the means by which agricultural. So this is agriculture. Promote legislative fixes to address abuse, limit spending, prohibit, clarify, create a charter act, reform farm subsidies, which, by the way, USDA is usually controlled by a private institution anyway. PLC, the primary subsidy programs include the ARC and PLC programs and the Federal Crop Insurance Program. Farmers can participate on a crop-by-crop basis. These programs cover about 20 crops, blah, 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 blah. And repeal the sugar program, should not be in the central planning business. And the sugar program is a prime example of harmful central planning. Ideally, repeal the ARC and PLC again, they want to just dismantle everything that actually helps farmers, but in their own words, wanted to address abuse and limit spending to directly to help farmers and ranchers address issues due to unforeseen events. Like, maybe I shouldn't be jumping around like this because I might not be making the point that I'm trying to make here. But throughout this document, and I might just have to pour through it off camera, and then put all the notes in there so we can find it and talk about the direct issues. But freaky shit now. His flag in the background is upside down. That's a sign with him talking like he does. Yeah. And I'm sure... Wow, I didn't notice that. The U.S. Constitution and other writings. It is upside down, which is a sign of distress. Wow, good catch. I did not catch that. I was just seeing a bunch of American paraphernalia, and it didn't even click. I've told you guys the BS I was taught in high school. I had to write a paper about the reasons for the War of Northern Aggression, but I couldn't say that slavery was one of the reasons. Of course, I didn't follow directions because that's BS. My mom had to go fight with the teacher because she gave me a D for tying everything back to slavery. No, it's a sign that the flag is PO'd at him. You know what? I'll take it.
Only then could quote-unquote progress be realized. So if one was curious, one might ask, but progress to what end? In other words, they believed that American constitutionalism and the principles it embodied were no longer sufficient, relevant, or self-evident. Progress needed to be made for the sake of progress without being tethered to some type of metaphysical past. History and tradition were of this past and should not be used to prudentially guide us into the future. Instead, their slogan could have been, "We are the people we've been waiting for," as Barack Obama famously said. The inclinations of this would mean a break from the limited government constitutionalism America had known and was no doubt a huge part of its success. This new progress would undoubtedly encroach on the individual liberty of its citizens, whereby decisions would be made in a far and distant capital, ignoring our traditions of federalism and local autonomy.
Decisions are made in a far distant capital anyway by the legislative, executive, and judicial branches at the federal level.
And not surprisingly, this would have severe ramifications for America in the short term, but also in our present day. While Presidents Theodore Roosevelt and Taft called themselves progressives during their presidencies, they still revered the Constitution, and progressivism was more of a vehicle for their policy platforms. It was really Woodrow Wilson, America's 28th president, who openly challenged the foundations of the U.S. Constitution and enacted wide-scale reforms through his New Freedom agenda, which is a precursor to FDR's New Deal, that would drastically change the relationship of the citizen and the government, with a thumb on the scale side of government. For instance, it was Wilson who oversaw the implementation of the first federal income tax. Thank you for that. And drastically began to increase federal spending. And it was his administration that promoted the Federal Reserve Act, which created the Fed and central control of the monetary system. He also supported the ill-conceived federal amendment of prohibition and Amendment 17, which led to the direct election of U.S. senators instead of through the state legislatures.
Now, to be fair, not everything in these trainings are actually psychopathic drivel, right? Not all of it. A lot of it, but not all of it. Some of it is actually historically accurate. Woodrow Wilson did do these things, and obviously the first federal income tax has conflated to what it is today. You'll find out that they're really complaining about the high tax rate against the wealthy, not so much about us poors. The increased federal spending, if we actually were to look at the history of Woodrow Wilson's federal spending, you'll see it was to help citizens post-World War I. The Federal Reserve Act was obviously a detriment because it then took the right and authority of money, of the Treasury and creating money out of the hands of the government and put it into the hands of banks, thus creating the Federal Reserve, which is a conglomerate of banks to decide interest rates, money, and all that other fun stuff. The direct election of senators is actually a good thing because that's democracy. So that one's outright good. But the fact that it used to be state legislators, could you imagine how much more? For instance, if it was a red state, you could not even conceive of a blue senator existing and vice versa. At least with this, you still get the chance of popular vote to decide who represents your state, which is the purpose of the senator. So bear in mind that some of this will be factually relevant, but it will still be very skewed for a specific bias. When I said the Civil War wasn't really about slavery, I didn't mean slavery wasn't an aspect of it. When I was learning more about the Civil War, a teacher said that Lincoln didn't set out right away to free slaves, that it came about during the course of the Civil War. Sure. And in fact, he wouldn't have fought the Civil War if there was a way to prevent the war in the first place and keep the country whole. In that sense, Abraham Lincoln was a coward and wasn't very principled. But to the point, yes, there were other elements, and I think he was even willing to debate the slavery aspect too. But at that point, then the North started, like Northerners, started really supporting the end to slavery as a whole, and so it became one of his policy platforms, albeit unwillingly. One of the worst presidents in American history. Not that he didn't do all bad things, just that from what I read, it's hideous. Yeah, no, if he's responsible for the Federal Reserve Act, he created the income tax, and sure, the federal spending, that's debatable because, again, he created government programs that ultimately help people. And then, of course, the direct election of senators. That's always a good thing. The more that people can exercise the right to vote and have ownership over their elected officials, the better.
What Antonin Scalia, the revered originalist Supreme Court Justice,
Let's listen to that again.
Amendment 17, which led to the direct election of U.S. senators instead of through the state legislatures. What Antonin Scalia, the revered originalist Supreme Court Justice, once referred to as the death of federalism.
They are venerating Justice Scalia, who was the singularly most corrupt Supreme Court justice in American history until Clarence Thomas. Yes. Do I need to play it again?
While much of this is accepted in today,
Let's go ahead and play that again.
what Antonin Scalia, the revered originalist Supreme Court Justice, once referred to as the death of federalism. While much of this is accepted in today's world, this was
They
revolutionary
live in a
for its
completely
time.
different universe.
Additionally, Wilson's internationalism in foreign intervention also involved America in World War
I obviously don't have a laundry list of activities that Justice Scalia did, but I do recall vividly that he was accepting gifts, payouts, monies, the whole shebang that Clarence Thomas did to a lesser degree, and was one of the most conservative judges we've ever had.
I. And while noble in its intentions, it came at a great sacrifice to 116,000 American soldiers and their families, especially as America had been historically more isolationist. He was also the leading architect
Hold on.
to
What?
the
What
sacrifice
did we
to
miss?
100 Wilson's internationalism in foreign intervention. While much of this is accepted in today's world, this was revolutionary for its time. Additionally, Wilson's internationalism in foreign intervention also involved America in World War I. And while noble in its intentions, it came at a great sacrifice to 116,000 American soldiers and their families, especially as America had been historically more isolationist. He was also the leading architect of the ill-fated League of Nations, which the U.S. Senate and the American people would subsequently reject.
Did you hear that? World War I, we shouldn't have done that. Like, that was a war that was going to spill out into the whole world. It just happened to get isolated into Europe because it was actually finished in Europe. Had the United States not gotten involved, again, things could have been extremely different, historically speaking. And then the League of Nations to try and create a democratic interaction between sovereign states to, I don't know, prevent another world war. That's diplomacy. That's exactly what should be done as a country. Oh, I wish it wasn't so hot
By the presidential
here.
election of 1920, America seemed to have had enough of progressive experimentation. The Republican nominee, Warren Harding, and his vice presidential nominee, Calvin Coolidge,
This part right here, and I'm going to take notes that I need to get into this part of the video, but
ran for president with the
Jesus.
campaign promise of a return to normalcy. Harding and Coolidge overwhelmingly won the popular vote, the largest popular vote landslide since James Monroe ran for re-election unopposed in 1820, 100 years ago. Under Harding and Coolidge, America witnessed the Roaring Twenties and oversaw one of the greatest periods of economic prosperity and cultural novelty in American history.
Play that again. I'll read what you wrote first. This joker would throw his own mother at Iraq if it meant getting the WMDs after the 9/11 attack, and he's peeing on getting involved in a global conflict after personal attacks to the US? Correct. And then a crash. Wait for it. First, let's hear it again, folks.
Under Harding and Coolidge, America witnessed the Roaring Twenties and oversaw one of the greatest periods of economic prosperity and cultural novelty in American history.
Which could easily be argued as happening today under the Biden administration. Not that it is, but if you look at the stock market rising and so on and so forth, all of the same elements that led to the Great Depression are currently present now, and actually to a greater degree. Carrying on.
Harding and Coolidge would begin to swing the pendulum back to limited government, fiscal restraint, non-intervention, and would promote the idea.
He put that solely on Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was the one who criminalized selling alcohol through the prohibition
Of Americanism, a sense of national pride and esteem for the Constitution. So why do I mention all this? Because this period of time in the early 20th century is really the beginning of a trajectory that solidified the left versus right political dichotomy that still exists today. The early beginnings of a quote-unquote conservative movement, even though it wasn't called that back then, was initially formed in response to the progressive challenge to American constitutionalism in the early 20th century. For the first time in modern American history, there was a real need to organize a movement to conserve the founding, its first principles.
We can go back and listen to it, but they're blaming
Today,
Woodrow Wilson.
We refer to this period of the early conservative movement as...
It doesn't matter. They're taking credit for the Civil War ending slavery. They are taking credit for creating the Civil Rights Act. It doesn't matter what reality is. Okay. That is why we are doing this. They are literally rewriting history to radicalize and incentivize and inspire conservatives who are vulnerable, who are choosing not to pay attention to history, to do their own research, so that they will then fall in line to this rhetoric. And by the way, in about 6 minutes, we'll get to that point.
As the old right. Though Harding would die unexpectedly in office in 1923.
Oh, he probably
Coolidge
does. That's
maintained and
the
expanded
worst
on
part
Harding's
of it.
policies. Coolidge was incredibly popular and was elected overwhelmingly in his own right in 1924. And while dismissed as silent Cal for his perceived unremarkable speeches or brevity, a Coolidge biographer wrote that at the time, Coolidge embodied the spirit and hopes of the middle class, could interpret their longings, and express their opinions. As a quick aside, a story that was widely circulated during Coolidge's time was that someone once told him, "I made a bet today that I could get more than 2 words out of you." And Coolidge replied, "You lose."
And see, then they do these little funny
In
quips and
1928,
anecdotes.
Coolidge chose not to run for re-election as he believed that if he won, he would serve 10 years as president, which was something no one has ever or should ever aspire to, he believed. Instead, Republican Herbert Hoover, Coolidge's Secretary of Commerce, easily won the presidency against Democrat Al Smith, the current governor of New York. As everyone knows, the country would enter the Great Depression after the stock market crash of 1929.
Again, they talk about this. He literally just said the stock market will crash in 1929 after a Republican president and administration for the past 8 years created an economy that directly led to the Great Depression. A Republican president got elected into the Great Depression, and
The
listen,
American public would blame Hoover for not being able to correct the economy and would usher in then New York Governor Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the presidency
Who
in
resolved
1932
it.
in a landslide election. While FDR did not call himself a progressive, as that term at the time was now out of style, FDR, however, called himself a liberal, but was a great admirer of Woodrow Wilson, and very much believed in using the government en masse to solve society's ills, which
And he did, by creating Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and guiding us through World War II. I am telling you, I cannot emphasize this enough. We can make fun of it. We can mock it. We can say, stupid conservatives, you don't know history. That's the point. They are rewriting history. They are choosing deliberately to rewrite history, to paint themselves as the good guys and the victors, rather than the literal comic book villains that they have been through their entire existence. It is deliberate, it is insidious, and it is necessary in order to gain more support for their ideology, to get people to actually put through this manifesto. Because otherwise, if they were saying, yep, we're the cause for the Civil War, we are the reason why slavery exists, we're the reason why the Civil Rights Movement took so long to happen, we're the reason for the Great Depression, we're the reason for this, we're the reason for that, we're for all of the ills of modern society can be directly pinned on Ronald Reagan's forehead, nobody would support conservatives, because all of their policies are garbage and have been throughout the entire history of the conservative movement and leadership in this country. So they have to rewrite history. They have to be biased, and they have to put spin on it so that people, not us, some of you maybe, but not us in chat and talking right now, will succumb to it. This is meant to reach out to the vulnerable and indoctrinate them. This is literal indoctrination. This is literal propaganda. This is literal radicalization. Those three words are this right here. But they complain if you say something and call you trying to erase history. But then if you blame their idols and say you're trying to hate the country and all over the world. Right.
at the time
we haven't even gotten to the point where I had to stop.
a devastated economy, rampant poverty, and high unemployment. FDR's New Deal policy experimentation would unleash the government in an unprecedented spending spree and bureaucratic largesse, funded by the largest tax increases in American history, with the top tax level paying as high as 94%.
That's what they are actually upset about. They don't care about taxes. They care about the top tax rate being 94%.
And created the notorious alphabet soup of agencies that attempted to deal with all the economic crises. Dr. Charles Kessler, the senior fellow at the Claremont Institute and editor of the Claremont Review of Books, believes there were four major waves of progressivism led by 4 U.S. presidents. And if there was a Mount Rushmore for influential progressive presidents, the 4 heads on it would be Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Lyndon Johnson, and Barack Obama. During each of these presidents,
The fact that they want to put Obama as a progressive hero is beyond me.
America saw
Where?
a government
Where?
expansion
Show
of
me
powers,
where.
the likes of which America had never seen before. The sheer size and scope of the New Deal agenda, the high tax rate increases, the constitutional crisis surrounding FDR's court packing attempts.
And now they're not even angry about the taxes. They're just like the fact that they exist. Now they're just mad that they're so high for the rich. Again, it's a bait and switch. It is constantly pushing the buck, writing a new line in the sand. But if you took a Harding, Hoover, and Coolidge approach to the Depression, you'd never see any economic recovery. Exactly, because they were well, Hoover not so much. Well, actually, no, because Hoover was part of the administration. The point being, yes, those 3 were directly, explicitly responsible for the Great Depression. And the fact that, and because of the Great Depression, our conservatives leaders lost, and then we got the socialist FDR. It's insane. Obama was to the right of Reagan. Exactly. Like, it's not... He was maybe progressive by... whose standards, honestly? Like, I don't...
And eventually, FDR's promise of a second Bill of Rights, whereby government promised a never-ending involvement in our daily lives, would lead to the formation of a congressional conservative coalition that sought to halt further New Deal legislation.
So the second Bill of Rights, for those of you who are unfamiliar, so the second Bill of Rights, we will go ahead and add a new window. This is the evil second Bill of Rights that this man is talking about. Evil, evil, evil. Evil Knievel. All right, can we get to the top? What the hell? Put this on top and quit being a pain in my ass. All right. So, his remedy was to declare an economic bill of rights to guarantee these specific rights. The right to work, which was good at the time because there was indentured servitude existing in America. An adequate income for food, shelter, and recreation, which also got implemented, the minimum wage. But it was idea, again, for food, shelter, and recreation. Not just minimum wage, but a livable income. Farmers' rights to a fair income, freedom from unfair competition and monopolies, which is, again, in place. Decent housing, which I can attest to does not exist. Adequate medical care, which clearly doesn't exist in the form of insurance companies. Social security, and, of course, education. That's the evil second Bill of Rights that largely was passed and put into play in America that they just decided to lambast in this training.
They believed that much of the New Deal policies were not working and gave government way too much power, and that it was
LBJ was definitely not progressive in any sense of the imagination. Remember, he was responsible for the Civil Rights Act during his administration, right? Sure. But not 7 minutes ago, they were taking credit for the Civil Rights Act. The conservatives, not LBJ, not the progressive Mount Rushmore, conservatives. So in the same training, not even 7 minutes apart, they have already contradicted themselves.
Two that got us out of the Great Depression, not the alphabet soup of agencies. And while historians justifiably credit FDR's steadfast reduction in deal legislation, they believe that much of the New Deal policies were not working and gave government way too much power, and that it was actually the economic ingenuity and production during World War II that got us out of the Great Depression.
Which was mandated by the country.
Not the alphabet soup of agencies. And while historians justifiably
I do notice. That's why we're doing this.
Leadership and
this is indoctrination.
World War II and calm a fearful nation that had been attacked, it was his domestic agenda legacy that would solidify a quote-unquote new right, similar to the old right in many ways, but with new and serious challenges. The new right would rise to repudiate the large-scale New Deal expansions of government, identify and diagnose a societal post-war moral and cultural decline, and raise the alarm to the rising international communist threat during the beginnings of the nuclear age, which would threaten all of humanity. Senator Robert Taft, from Ohio, son of President Taft, would serve as the first of these early congressional conservative leaders and would help lead the charge in challenging FDR's New Deal and then Truman's Fair Deal.
And failed, thankfully. Now, this is where things start getting really interesting. This is where things really start hitting home that this is an initiative to generate organization, to create a movement, to inspire, to teach, to learn, to grow. And that they truly believe in their doctrine. So, we definitely need to pay attention to this coming part. I'm writing down what the timestamp here is, so that I can make content from it. If he's going
19
to trash FDR for anything, the best thing is not letting people escaping Nazis into the... Yeah, right? Let's go after FDR for something violent, right?
50, the liberal critic Lionel Trilling once famously said that liberalism is not only the dominant, but even the sole intellectual tradition in America. He went on to state that while a conservative or reactionary impulse did exist, it expressed itself only in irritable mental gestures which seems to resemble ideas. Flattering. By 1950, a fully functioning and powerful conservative movement had not yet formed and didn't even have a name yet. It was only in its infancy, but would soon transform to become a dynamic political movement that would usher in its early hero, Barry Goldwater, to win the Republican presidential nomination only 14 years later.
I cannot stress enough how they are rewriting history, the bias. Right. No, you're right. The Japanese internment camps is something they could criticize. Yeah, they absolutely could. And instead, they're blaming his big government. And they're saying that because of that, the Republican movement, the conservative movement started to grow because of it. And that Barry Goldwater was their first hero that came out of this movement. And again, this is where things start getting really interesting, because on the one hand, they are correct in what the 4 Ps of a movement are, but once you start listening to it.
How did it do this? According to conservative movement historian Dr. Lee Edwards, a political movement had to have the 4 Ps in order to be successful. The 4 Ps were philosophers, popularizers, philanthropists, and politicians. A political movement needed philosophers to come up with a viable, consistent philosophy and cogent set of principles it would embody. It would need popularizers, writers and members of the media, to promote their ideas to a wide audience and create a national constituency. When the philosophers' ideas had been popularized, a solid financial base of donors and philanthropists were needed to fund the organizational and infrastructural apparatus of that movement, which could include think tanks, media publications, and grassroots organizations. And finally, any successful political movement needed to elect charismatic, principled leadership who were proficient in media to champion their policy preferences, activate their national constituency, and win popular mandates to achieve political and legislative success.
Do you hear all that? He's not wrong. He is not wrong at all. You do need the thinkers, the people to come up with the ideas and the ideology, i.e. the manifesto, i.e. the policy platform. Then you need people who can disseminate that information across the country, much like social media. You need influencers. You need the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram, TikTok, Twitch. But you also need to gain relevancy. You need to gain actual presence, right? It's not enough to just have those things. You need to promote those things. And then finally, you need the money from philanthropists, from other institutions to finance your movement, your infrastructure, so that your things can work. That's one of the things that's currently holding the Green Party back. They have the philosophy, they have the voice, they do not have the resources to grow. And then, of course, they don't have any elected officials either, which is the 4th thing. You need charismatic, well-articulated politicians who can enunciate these values and these beliefs and carry them through. Moving on.
So we begin our story of the philosophers by analyzing 3 disparate groups of thought leaders whose ideas would become the basis of this new right and burgeoning conservative movement in the post-FDR, post-World War II era. According to conservative historian Dr. George H. Nash, these 3 groups would make up what would be called the conservative 3-legged stool. They were the classical liberals and libertarians, the traditionalists,
liberals,
and the anti-communists.
The liberals! And of course, anti-communists. Now, this is where I think I
The
caught
first
up
group will
to.
explore
Now
the
we're
classical
all
liberals
watching
and
this for the first time.
libertarians. According to Dr. Nash, they resisted the threat of the ever-expanding state to liberty, private enterprise, and individualism. They were convinced that America was rapidly drifting towards statism or socialism and offered a
The fear of socialism, or statism, as he liked to call it, has been around since the very beginning of the conservative movement. And the fact of the matter is, socialism, as we now know today, has only failed in those countries where it has existed because of American interventionism. Socialism, or social democracy, actually empowers citizens to have basic needs met, such as healthcare, education, rights at the workplace, transportation, and of course, the ability to spend their time leisurely. The things that this guy and the whole project claim to espouse and venerate are the very things that they are preventing through their own initiatives. Right, they do support wealth redistribution upward.
spirited defense for the free market, free enterprise, a return to laissez-faire economics, lower taxation, and limited
Laissez-faire
government.
economics.
Their most prominent early leader was economist Friedrich von Hayek, or who was also known as F.A. Hayek. Hayek's seminal work, The Road to Serfdom, written in 1944, would be the ember that sparked this revival of classical liberalism and would revolt against the zeitgeist of the time, Keynesian economics. The main thesis of the book was that tyranny inevitably results from government control of economic decision-making through central planning. Central planning, or socialism, would inevitably lead the people down a road to serfdom or totalitarianism, as was seen in the Soviet Union. Hayek said the title of the book was inspired by French philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville and his writings on the road to servitude. While published in 1944, it would not actually be till April 1945 when Reader's Digest, one of the most popular magazines in America at the time, published an abridged version of the book that would bring it to a far wider audience beyond the academic world. Hayek is also responsible for founding the Mount Pelerin Society in 1947, an influential international organization of economists, philosophers, historians, intellectuals, and business leaders that help revive and coalesce a worldwide coalition of free market advocates.
I am hearing all this for the first time as well. Does any of this sound like the upward mobility of resources like we're currently experiencing today, but being codified into law? Because that's what it sounds like to me.
Another popular and influential figure was economist Milton Friedman and his books, in particular, Capitalism and Freedom, written in 1962, with the premise that economic freedom is a necessary precondition for political freedom, and his other book, Free.
That's true, though. In a vacuum, that is true. Economic freedom is political freedom. If you have financial security, you can be as political as you want. So, ask me again what the average wage, the median wage in America is. Ask me again what the minimum wage is. Ask me again how often we have to work and that overtime is not going to be covered and that we are at the behest of our overlords, bosses and managers. It's almost as if we're being denied economic freedom on purpose so that we can't be politically free.
Free to Choose, which was written in 1980 and based on his popular subsequent television series. Both Hayek and Friedman are properly credited for popularizing a classical liberal revival. Other popular early economic influencers in their published works that helped define this thought group were Albert J. Nock in his book Memoirs of a Superfluous Man, written in 1943, Henry Hazlitt in his book Economics in One Lesson, written in 1946, and Ludwig von Mises in his three books Liberalism, written in 1927, Bureaucracy in 1944, and Human Action in 1949.
They tell you they will solve these problems, and then they make it so there's nothing there to confront so the solutions can be made. This is what I'm talking about. This is literally... I mean, I'm a broken record at this point. We should keep a counter of how many times I've said this is literally indoctrination, because it is. He basically is taking all this time to say the quiet part out loud. Economic freedom is political freedom. Meanwhile, the lived experience of every single American citizen under deregulated business and this economy, which is so great except for wages and employment, is depressing our economic freedom so that we cannot be politically free. Imagine how many people would actually participate in the electoral process if they weren't busy struggling to survive. Yeah, serfdom is bad, but here's actual serfdom and without any rights or ways to deal with it. This is not good stuff.
Concurrently and independently, the second group of thought leaders were the traditionalists. According to Dr. Nash, a second school of thought emerged who were shocked by totalitarianism, total war, and the development of secular, rootless, mass society during the 1930s and 1940s. After World War II and the horror of the Holocaust, the traditionalists urged a return to traditional religions and ethical absolutes and a rejection of the relativism that had corroded Western values and produced an intolerable vacuum that was filled with amoral ideologies.
We got to go back to church so that we can beat our wives and not satisfy them in the bedroom or smoke pot because it'll make white women want to dance with black men. If economic freedom were actually there, this clown wouldn't make these videos. He's doing this because he wants problems to continue. Yep. He wants videos to remain relevant. I swear, these problems continue on, he's going to blame the wrong people like he's doing now. It's a constant cycle. Except, this is exactly how you form a cult. You become an exclusive member of this group, Project 2025. You get insider information, this training, Prepare to Serve. You learn the culture, the mechanisms of the group that makes you special. All of this, the history of the conservative movement. And then you learn the key words and phrases. American exceptionalism, first principles, the overemphasis of the Declaration of Independence, the conflation, rewriting history to show that Americans' prosperity during the Roaring '20s just somehow had nothing to do with the Great Depression, that these two events were completely unrelated. According to what he wants, pornography gets criminalized, except his hero was in porn, sort of, so he'd have to put him in prison for it. It's not the point, is it?
Traditionalism has been defined as believing that tradition and custom guide man and his worldview. Each generation inherits the experience and culture of its ancestors, and through convention and precedence, man is able to inherit the culture of his ancestors and pass it down to his descendants. Traditionalism's slogan could be summed up in the popular refrain, usually credited to Edmund Burke, "Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it."
So I'm a victim of using a traditionalist slogan. I think as we all are. Of course, that's the thing about history and language, is that it can evolve over time and its meaning can change as well. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Again, those who also deliberately rewrite history intend to repeat it.
Their most prominent early leader was the philosopher and political theorist Russell Kirk. Kirk's most noteworthy work, which was actually a published version of his doctoral dissertation, was titled The Conservative Mind, From Burke to Eliot, published in 1953, a providential year in conservatism's history. It was a scholarly masterpiece linking an intellectual heritage of conservative thought from the time of the founders to the present day, with a special appreciation for Edmund Burke, Alexis de Tocqueville, and the Anglo-American philosophical tradition. Kirk believed that tradition, or
Anglo-American, just to be clear, means white people. Just to be very, very clear, that means white nationalism. White people.
And freedom were inseparable. The book was well received and helped legitimize the burgeoning conservative movement. And many
But if you say that, that's a trigger word for Nazis. So you can't say that, because if you said that part out loud, guess what?
historians credit the
Your movement stalls in the very beginning.
popularity of the book for popularizing the term conservative and giving the conservative movement its name, still used today. Another critical contributor to the traditionalist cause was Richard Weaver, whose seminal text, Ideas Have Consequences, was written in 1948. Its thesis was that the beginning of Western decline occurred when man flirted with nominalism, or the rejection of absolute truths. One other important figure was American sociologist Robert Nisbet. His influential book, The Quest for Community, A Study in the Ethics of Order and Freedom, was written in 1953, the same year as The Conservative Mind was published. His thesis was, the history of the West since the end of the Middle Ages was the story of decline of intermediate associations between the individual and the state. The weakening and dissolution of such ties as family, church, guild, and neighborhood had not, as many had hoped, liberated men. Instead, it had produced alienation, isolation, spiritual desolation, and the growth of mass man. But man cannot live in Hobbesian isolation, and so to satisfy his longings, he seeks out community, eventually finding it in the totalitarian state. But man...
Let's be very, very, very clear that isolationism was a totalitarian activity to disrupt neighborhood organization using the church as a tool of control and manipulation throughout the Dark Ages. Later on in the Middle Ages, it was still a weapon. Obviously, Galileo Galilei was killed, right? And to the point of the burgeoning market of capitalism, what's more profitable, selling one product to a family or selling one product to every individual within a family? American individualism and isolationism and all this exceptionalism and laissez-faire economics deliberately created this very thing that he is claiming should have never happened. And in fact, talking about community and working together in family is often treated as socialism or communism by these very same individuals. So they want their cake, they want to talk about the good things, but the things that are good, they also dismiss as socialist or communist.
cannot live in... Now, also concurrently and independently, a third and final group of thought leaders were emerging.
Extreme religious people took out the life of Dr. Tiller for performing abortions after hearing Bill O'Reilly mock his name by saying baby killer. Right. Exactly.
Being called the anti-communists. Its early leaders were Whittaker Chambers, James Burnham, and Frank Meyer. According to Dr. Nash, the anti-communists had a profound conviction, being ex-radicals and former communists themselves, that the West was engaged in a titanic struggle with communism, not only abroad, but at home domestically. Communism, the economic and political theories espoused by Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and Vladimir Lenin, were a complete repudiation of the West, including the cherished ideas of representative democracy, free market economics, private property, free speech, tradition and customs, and religious freedom. Soviet communism called for a worldwide workers' revolution that would end up killing at least 100 million people around the world, under leaders such as Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot, Fidel Castro, and especially Mao Zedong. Whittaker Chambers...
To be fair, he's right about the death toll. To be fair, it didn't result in the popular uprising, but again, do you see how they skew the history, the readings, the works? He's literally lumping Karl Marx in with Lenin and Stalin and Mao Zedong, who were war criminals of their era. Do you see how subtle that is?
Soviet spy, would testify in Congress in 1948 that there was a deep-seated communist infiltration in the United States government that needed to be rooted out. His congressional testimony would famously lead to the criminal indictment of Alger Hiss, a popular State Department official famously outed by Chambers as a Soviet spy. Chambers would publish his autobiographical account in his book Witness, which was written in 1952. Special attention should be paid to his emotional opening called Letter to My Children. Another preeminent anti-communist figure was James Burnham. A former Trotskyite, he rejected so-called containment of communism and urged for a rollback of communism worldwide. It is said that Ronald Reagan was actually greatly influenced by Burnham's work, helping to form Reagan's Cold War policies that led to the demise of the Soviet Union. Burnham outlined much of his thinking in a three-part book series, including The Struggle for the World, written in 1947, The Coming Defeat of Communism in 1949, and Containment or Liberation, an inquiry into the aims of United States foreign policy in 1953. But his opus would be the seminal Suicide of the West, an essay on the meaning and destiny of liberalism, written in 1964, which would become a very influential text supporting the fusion of all three leading conservative thought groups at the time. Other important anti-communist writers in the books were William Henry Chamberlain in his book Collectivism, A False Utopia, written in 1937, Freda Utley in her book The Dream We Lost, The Soviet Union Then and Now in 1940, Eugene Lyons in his book The Red Decade, The Stalinist Penetration of America in 1941, Max Eastman in his book Stalin's Russia and the Crisis in Socialism in 1940, and
I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't aware that conservatives had doctrine and theory that they're supposed to read. Because you never hear them talk about these are the first times I'm hearing about these books. I'm sure you are too. But there is theory, much like leftists on the Facebook are like, you need to read Marx, you need to read this, you need to read that. Conservatives don't care because, again, the messaging has become so commonplace, the need for the theory is no longer necessary. And it coincides with what they were talking about. In order to build a movement, you need the philosophers. And so in 1953 was the culmination of all these philosophers coming together and disseminating their works. So yeah, this concerted effort is not only underway and is actually being undertaken in the exact way they outlined it earlier in this training.
Reflections on the Failure of Socialism in 1955. And other books included The God That Failed, written in 1949, and even George Orwell's seminal classics 1984 and Animal Farm.
And now he's taking 1984 as part of their works too, which was an indictment of the
as each of these thought groups began to grow in influence in the late 40s and
surveillance
1950s,
state.
Astute observers realized that a consolidation of sorts would be needed and helpful in order to have real political influence. Two men in particular would play an indelible role in fusing these three groups together.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Making up what would...
That's exactly what I just said, that the conservative movement has completely mastered its messaging to where the theory no longer matters, and now we're going to learn about the architects.
Become the conservative three-legged stool and the modern conservative movement. Enter William F. Buckley Jr. and Frank Meyer. At only age 29, William F. Buckley Jr. founded National Review magazine in 1955, undoubtedly the first influential conservative publication. Buckley was a wonderkin of the highest order and was known as a debate assassin, according to Dr. Lee Edwards, and certainly would become the most prominent and influential conservative voice next to Ronald Reagan for much of the latter part of the 20th century. After graduating from prestigious Yale University, he famously wrote God and Man at Yale, The Superstitions of Academic Freedom, in 1951, which was a devastating critique of his alma mater and Ivy League schools for abandoning their teaching of free market economics and the Judeo-Christian ethic for socialism and secularism instead.
Do we need to repeat that? We're not a Christian nation, but again, anytime a private institution rejects Christianity and religious zealotry, The conservatives have a problem with it. Meanwhile, we're supposed to have religious freedom.
The book would become a bestseller, and Buckley would become an overnight sensation and the most sought-after conservative speaker on college campuses. You could say he was the Ben Shapiro of his time.
Oh my God! That's why Ben Shapiro was in the hearing the other day. He is name dropped in this training. You have got... Oh my God. Wow. I wish I was making this up.
Soon become the first president of the Intercollegiate Society of Individualists, or now known as the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, or ISI, founded by Frank Chodorov in 1953. ISI was the first national young conservative organization that helped spread conservative ideas on college campuses. Later on, after the 1964 presidential election and his New York City mayoral run in 1965, Buckley would be the lone conservative voice on television, hosting the popular debate show Firing Line for 33 years on PBS from 1966 to 1999. Frank Meyer, a former Communist Party USA apparatchik, knew all too well the perils of communism. After reading The Road to Serfdom while serving in the Army during World War II, he became disenchanted with communism and soon would begin a decade-long journey that would bring him to National Review and become one of Buckley's top confidants. The influence of National Review cannot be overstated during this time.
Actually, isn't National Review one of the most preeminent disinformation conservative rags currently still in existence? Like, am I not? Yeah. Yes, it is. I am in fact correct. Imagine that.
Sizing of libertarian, traditionalist, and anti-communist thought. Buckley and Meyer would invite thought leaders from these three groups to write for the magazine and defend their positions and challenge one another. Meyer believed it was imperative to create a strategic integration of the three to form a more cohesive philosophical union as well as a political coalition that could combat liberal ideology and ultimately defeat the left at the ballot box. Meyer's vision was called fusion. I know, I don't mean Asian cooking or nuclear fusion, but in some ways the effect would have a nuclear reaction that would propel the conservative movement to be forged. Meyer understood and appreciated both the traditionalists and the classical liberal and libertarians' ideas. While their emphases were different, one on economics.
The part that really gets me, classical liberalism is somehow part of the conservative movement, and yet Democrats call themselves liberals, which then that would mean that the conservatives consider the Democrats part of their thing as a useful tool. Obviously they are a useful tool, but I'm actually waiting for this to reveal at some point where the schism between the conservative movement to what it is today and what it was then, between the Republicans and the Democrats, that schism occurred from the liberal traditionists to the conservative movement. And what we're seeing is the ramifications of it. I'm waiting for that.
In that both, at times, viewed each other with suspicion, one being too individualist and the other being perceived as authoritarian, but both could support Western values and opposition to the welfare state, according to the Fund for American Studies senior scholar and fusionist expert Don Devine. And both branches believed that the rise of international communism was the greatest threat of all, and thus could find common cause with the anti-communists. An understanding was achieved that, according to Becky Norton Dunlop, the Heritage Foundation Ronald Reagan Distinguished Fellow, that conservatives would use libertarian means to pursue and achieve traditional social ends. Meyer would claim that a tension between liberty and virtue actually had always existed in America's consciousness, all the way back to our founding. So fusion had an intellectual heritage all sides could relate to. Thus, conservative fusion and the modern conservative movement were forged. Meyer defends his case in his seminal book, In Defense of Freedom, a Conservative Credo, written in 1962, and would follow it up with his next book, What is Conservatism?, written in 1964. The latter was an attempt to forge conservative consensus among the different factions and features 12 brilliant essays by the likes of Hayek, Buckley, Kirk, journalist M. Stanton Evans, economist Wilhelm Röpke, Wilmore Kendall, John Chamberlain, and others.
Notice how all of these German names sound like they were probably former Nazis? Just throwing that out there. Secondly, the fact that the conservative movement was able to bring together three major echelons of conservative thought is the exact point that I've been making across all of these streams, which is leftists need to start working together for common cause. Now, okay, I say that, but that's clearly not enough. Clearly that's not enough. So I am on the three-legged stool, if you will, of unifying leftist thought. That we need to do X, Y, and Z. Everybody else in the leftist community believes in decentralized organization, and then there's those on the other side that think it'll all naturally coalesce together, but they're unwilling to work here, and they're unwilling to work there. So we need somebody, which, okay, I get that but you know what I'm saying? Those who want central organization of leftism, those who believe it'll happen and agree with that, but they think it'll happen naturally and shouldn't be forced, and then those who believe that the individual efforts are important to be left alone and, of course, decentralized. So there's agreement here, there's agreement this way, there's agreement this way. There's some agreement this way, like, hey, if we're all about whales and we're all about trees, we can work together in our little islands. So there is some networking. But in general, there hasn't been a cohesive fusion for the left. And as we can see, that is what's necessary. That is why the conservative movement is as powerful as it is today. The reason why it can file as a 501c3 and then peddle actual political philosophy in stark violation of the law.
Meyer would edit it all and write the intro and conclusion chapters, tying it all together. Both books are masterpieces. As the philosophers were harmonizing the philosophy, the popularizers were spreading the good word, educating the masses, and creating a national constituency of conservative voters, activists, organizations, philanthropists, and elected leaders. While National Review was certainly the most prominent early conservative publication, there were other pre-1964 popularizers that deserve notice that helped build consensus and a national constituency in the early years before the likes of conservative talk radio and cable news. The first of which, Human Events, was an early conservative weekly newspaper founded in 1944 and was financed by Henry Regnery and focused much on foreign policy and anti-communism. By 1964, it had a circulation of over 100,000. A Reagan biographer said it was hugely influential on him and that it was his favorite reading for years. There's a great story about Reagan and Human Events that Dr. Edwards tells.
And it will
when Reagan discovered
future
White House
generations
aides were
of
blocking
leaders.
its delivery, Reagan arranged for multiple copies to be sent to the White House residence every weekend. He made clear Human Events' importance to him by marking and clipping articles and passing them along to his assistants. A second publication was Analysis and was an early influential 4-page newsletter started by Frank Chodorov in 1944 as well, as an old-right individualist publication with 4,000 readers at its height of circulation, but soon would be merged into Human Events in 1951. Third publication was The Freeman. It was an early libertarian publication founded in 1950 and would eventually be regularly published by the Foundation for Economic Education, or FEE, which was founded in 1948, which is considered to be the oldest libertarian think tank in the country. And finally, Modern Age was one of the earliest and influential traditionalist magazines started in 1957 by Russell Kirk, in close collaboration with Henry Regnery as well, which still exists and is published by ISI today. Each represented a leading thought group that would help promote their ideas. The libertarians had the Freeman, Traditionalists had modern age. Anti-communists had human events. And analysis was for the old right. National Review, though, would act as an ecumenical publication, bringing all these ideas together. Another popularizer worthy of mention was the Henry Regnery Company, now known as Regnery Publishing, which was created in 1947 by Henry Regnery. Other than National Review and the aforementioned periodicals, conservatism had no presence on radio and television, the other popular mediums at the time, and certainly none from any of the leading publishing houses.
I mean, we're almost through this one. We got 20 more minutes left. But does this at least put into perspective the sheer infrastructure that was involved and how, despite there being islands of power or thought or message, they still found common cause? We have our revolution. We have Brand New 535. We have Save the Trees. We have Planned Parenthood. We have Black Lives Matter. We have all these different organizations promoting their things throughout their different organizations. Uh-oh. Did I drop? That's not reassuring. Cool. It doesn't look like I dropped. Anyway, the left has their individual organizations, but there is no sense of camaraderie and there's no sense of unity. There's no sense of common cause, no common grounds to be forged, other than on very rare occasions, very rare symposiums or conventions, do other left organizations actually work with one another. And then trying to get the publications to work together is just as tedious and problematic. Again, I don't have the answer to this problem. If I did, I would have absolutely implemented it by now. So the question that I posit to you, the viewer, not just for my channel, but even if you're on Hassan's channel, if you're on any leftist organization, group, org, activist, grassroots, whatever, what will it take for you to work with others implicitly? And if the answer is nothing, or we have to be on the same page on everything, then I think at the end of the day, there is no left movement. And if there's no way to resolve the infighting, the bickering, the mudslinging, the lack of common cause, then honestly, this is what we're going to get. This is exactly what we're going to get. And this is what we're up against. The Project 2025 is exactly what we're up against. And it is decades in the making. Decades in the making. And there is a science to it. There is a start, or there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to its creation. And if we cannot master those things, because it's a universal concept of how to build an organization or an ideology, right? You got to have the thought, the ideas, the ideology itself. You have to have a way to disseminate that information. You have a way to provide funding to keep the dissemination of the information going strong. And then you need the leaders that espouse that information and ideology. That is true for leftism. That is true for conservatism. That's true, as silly as it is to say, for centrism. And if we do not do this collectively, it's not going to happen naturally. If it was going to happen naturally, it would have happened by now. That's the whole problem. That is the entire problem. So, as we continue with this training, most of it is biased garbage. No arguments there. But the organization and infrastructure and the coalescing of what is today the conservative movement must be studied, understood, and adhered.
Regnery Publishing would serve as an early vehicle to help publish conservative-themed books and authors, such as Buckley's God and Man at Yale in 1951, and Russell Kirk's The Conservative Mind in 1953, as well as books by Albert J. Nock and James Burnham. An eventual sister company of Regnery Publishing would also form in 1964 called the Conservative Book Club started by publisher Neil McCaffrey, which would help conservative books reach a nationwide audience. Their first employee was Ann Edwards, wife of conservative historian Dr. Lee Edwards, who assisted him in research for many books and co-authored one with him as well. The book club would soon become an important pipeline in educating a national conservative audience. Remember, at the time, there was no Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or Costco's back then. Margie Ross, the recent president of Regnery Publishing, who during her 20-year tenure produced...
I'm saying there are certain aspects of this training that are educational and worth listening to. For instance, the infrastructure. Learning the theory of the conservative so that you can use the words of the conservative against him to educate him and inform him that he has been misled. But I don't wish that upon anybody. Least of all, my wonderful followers.
More than 85 books on national bestseller lists, including 14 titles at number 1, has often spoke about the 5 major tidal waves of conservative media that helped popularize its movement. In the beginning, as we've discussed in this presentation, influential conservative thought was first manifested through the publications of influential books, with authors ranging from Hayek, Buckley, Kirk, and Chambers. Today, due to Regnery's success, there are now more than a dozen or so small, mid-sized to large conservative publishers, including Encounter Books. And a conservative imprint exists at most of the big publishing houses today, including HarperCollins' Broadside Books, Hachette Book Group Center Street, Simon & Schuster's Thresholds Edition, and Penguin Random House's Sentinel. The second vehicle would be the magazines and periodicals we've discussed as well, including National Review and Human Events. Magazines and periodicals would be published more regularly than books and would be able to better respond to the timely and newsworthy issues of the day. Future influential publications would arrive in the ensuing years, including Commentary, The American Spectator, The Weekly Standard, The American Conservative, Newsmax, First Things, the Claremont Review of Books, the New Criterion, and many
Newsmax
others.
isn't news.
In 1988,
it's literal propaganda.
A third and very important vehicle was launched with the dissolution of the radio so-called fairness doctrine, and would allow for the rise of the great Rush Limbaugh and the voluminous talk radio industry. Was launched with the dissolution of the radio so-called fairness doctrine, and would allow for the rise. In 1988, a third and very important vehicle was launched with the dissolution of the radio so-called fairness doctrine, and would allow for the rise of the great Rush Limbaugh and the voluminous talk radio industry.
They are celebrating the removal of the fairness doctrine, which actually never even made it into law, but it was proposed, or there's some elements to it. But yes. I haven't heard that name since he died. May his corpse rest in hell, right? But, free speech and the the first principles, right? American exceptionalism. But we need to be able to lie, because the fairness doctrine made us tell the truth, and it's hard to promote propaganda and doctrine to misinform and misdirect vulnerable young men into our cause if we have to tell the truth. Rush Limbaugh made it into Project 2025. Donald Trump made it into Project 2025. Ben fucking Shapiro made it into Project 2025 education course material.
Rush Limbaugh would become one of the most influential conservative voices for over 30 years and would inspire legions of talk radio hosts and enthusiasts across the country. Talk radio today is dominated by conservative voices and is still a leading vehicle for discussing conservative ideas with local and national audiences.
That is worth noting. Where am I in this stream? What's the minute counter? 155. Okay. I'm going to need to make a video or a clip of this too. This is very worth noting as well, that talk radio is still used as one of the most influential vehicles for conservative rhetoric and discussion and discourse, which I think we kind of knew that, right? Because radio does seem to be quite conservative on principle. You don't see very much liberalism. You don't see much activism. I literally don't know of any left-leaning radio station or major national radio talk show. TYT sticks to YouTube. And then there's Secular Talk, which is a wing of TYT. There's Redacted Tonight, which relies on social media. There's the various YouTube personalities, but again, all social media. Hassan, Twitch, and social media. I don't know that there is any leftist voices on radio. And because of that reason, most conservative radio stations are going to probably prevent them from taking it over because it's a monopoly. In that sense of the word. That is worth noting. That is actually very worth noting that in order to improve left-leaning messaging, we might very well have to get back into talk radio. We can't ignore talk radio. Bet you he wishes that Michael J. Fox provided stem cell research to cure what caused his death. There used to be Air America or something like that. Yeah, well, there isn't, is the main point. Today, there is nothing. Not that I can think of. Joe Rogan might be considered left-leaning only insofar as that he has both sides of the aisle come on. And the same thing with Howard Stern. You could consider him potentially left-leaning insofar that he has porn stars and others, people of that walk of life, come on his show, but I don't think he actually espouses left-leaning ideology. So when it comes to radio and talk shows, talk radio, I mean, just like, ignoring rural America is a bad idea, right? As far as the organization aspect goes, I 100% have the answers for what the left needs to do. I can, with absolute certainty, with absolute authority, 100% surety state that we need to be in rural America, small communities. Evidently, we need to also be a part of talk radio, and we need to start evoking emotion from viewers. We need to stop trying to shove theory down their throat, and we need to start talking about philosophy. Philosophy being, of course, more emotional than theory, right? It's not the philosophy of Karl Marx. It's not the philosophy of the Communist Manifesto. It's the philosophy of communists and socialists, right? That's a whole different story. Now, again, because historically, the leaders of communism and socialism have been found to be tyrants and dictators, causing the deaths of 100 million people and more, it's difficult to use the past to justify the present and future. So we do need new leaders. We do need new philosophers. And I can 100% be a philosopher, an advocate, as far as that goes. I cannot be a messenger. I don't know enough about messaging, despite being on Twitch. So I can deliver my philosophy through my message, but as far as a messaging apparatus, that's not enough. What we do need, however, is a messaging apparatus that does reclaim all of the media that we have given up, such as talk, such as radio, such as television. And then we need to take those online communities and we need to spread them. We need to expand them. And then we need to find the other thought leaders of our era, of our generation, and we need to get them to work together. That is how we do this. Are you saying that the right talk shows dominate the airwaves while they complain they are silenced while the left has practically nothing? I mean, I'm sensing sarcasm, but yes. That in all that time with the fairness doctrine, the left never actually had a voice of their own? Evidently not. Evidently, the left just fails at organizing. So no. Okay. So since you're asking genuinely, obviously conservatives haven't been silenced. They never have, and they will. They never will. And especially if they become into power, they will be the only thing we get to hear. And they will go out of their way to silence any opposition because that's their modus operandi. The issue is progressivism and liberal thought has fallen to the wayside in favor of the, I guess we can talk about the four pillars. And instead of relying on philosophy and dissemination, instead, liberalism is relying on politics and funding, right? And we can quantify that. We can 100% quantify that because the donor base of the Democratic Party is what's more important, not the actual constituency. And who are the thought leaders of the Democratic Party? The DCCC, who are consultants, who are well-funded. And then there's AIPAC, which is a foreign entity, which is spending money to combat, whoever they want, right? So the point being is that liberalism, the Democratic Party, has given up its philosophy and given up its messaging and is relying solely on the philanthropy and the politicians. So, as far as the four pillars go, there is a reason why leftism is as stark as it is. And we can even go to the Green Party. The Green Party has philosophers. Jill Stein, Ajamu Baraka? I don't know how to say his name. Anyway, we got those guys, right? We have the philosophers. They are somewhat present on social media, but they don't have the funding and they do not have politicians. They don't. The only places where they've gotten elected is at the city and county levels. And it's less than 200. I think it was 147 we discovered is how many elected positions they have. So the Green Party lacks resources and politicians, but they do have media and they do have philosophy. Conservatives have all four. Democrats have given up philosophy and they've given up media in favor of money and politicians. So while the right complained about the fairness doctrine, it was just a whole scenario they made up. Exactly. And it's the same scenario they continue to bring up. That circus that we were watching yesterday that made a lot of you tune out, which I get it. I get it. But it's that boring kind of circus that kind of highlights the insidious nature of the conservative movement. They are disingenuously saying that they are being silenced. Meanwhile, they already have their own apparati and their own structures, and they have significantly more resources than every other institution combined that deals with political messaging. I'm silenced that I'm going to put out a book saying I am being silenced. Exactly. Nobody can tell jokes anymore, and then you have an entire Comedy Central special about being a TERF or racist or homophobic. So anyway, I just wanted to make that point clear.
Top national shows include hosts Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, Glenn Beck, Mike
Hannity,
Gallagher, Dennis Prager, Hugh Hewitt, Charlie Kirk, and many, many others.
Charlie Kirk, I forgot about that clown.
Right before the 1996 presidential election, a small little cable news network launched, and within 6 years became the most watched cable news network in the country. I'm, of course, talking about Rupert Murdoch's Fox News.
Rupert Murdoch, who is a foreign... Keith Rupert Murdoch is an Australian-born American business magnate, investor, and media proprietor. He's a foreigner. It is foreign influence.
Understate the importance of Fox News. Fox would become an alternative to the mainstream media's stronghold on traditional legacy TV media outlets. For the first time, conservatives had a channel on television that would allow for more fair and balanced coverage than what they would normally get from NBC, ABC.
Conservatives have a channel to represent their ideology that is more fair and balanced. That is... That is literally contradicting itself in the statement that it was presented in.
ABC, CBS, and CNN. And the fifth and final tidal wave would be the internet and social media. Now, in its beginnings, conservatives believed that media would finally be accessible and democratized and could help get their message out beyond all filters. Certainly, there were reasons to be hopeful. Matt Drudge, a libertarian of sorts, published the Monica Lewinsky story in 1998 in the Drudge Report. In 2004, CBS News anchor Dan Rather was fired from his job after he aired a knowingly false report about George W. Bush's military service, which was first noticed by bloggers online. And with the success of Andrew Breitbart and his news operations, he would inspire legions of...
Is actual misinformation. Oh my God. What? It is an American far-right syndicated news opinion and commentary website founded in mid-2007. It is, by definition, far-right. And this, again, we're not watching this. Listen, this isn't YouTube. Let's be very clear. You will not find this on YouTube. You will not find this on TikTok. You will not find this on Facebook. You will not find this on Instagram. This is from the Project 2025 Presidential Administration Academy. This is their doctrine. This is their educational content. This is exactly what they think, what they feel, what they believe, and how they are disseminating information. They are aligned with Breitbart. They are aligned with Rush Limbaugh. They are aligned with the alt-right, which has taken in neo-Nazism, ultra-Christian nationalism. Basically, all of the domestic terrorist groups that are white nationalist are affiliated and associated in some way and utilize Breitbart and all these other alt-right extremist personalities. And Project 2025 is teaching conservatives about them as if they are legitimate activities, legitimate agencies that disseminate legitimate information. As if they care when the actual news reporters lie to them. They hail their lying news reporters if it shows their side in positive light. Exactly. And I've seen some New York Post covers of the store, and it's so hilarious how biased the news portion is on the front. Get the indoctrination message out. Well, exactly. Why do you think Bezos bought the Washington Post? Silencing us is bad, but yay to firing Dan Rather. When they did a story in the New York Post about Obamacare and portrayed Obama as a monkey shot in the street, I was so disgusted. Leia's dad stopped selling the New York Post at his store after that.
Of online investigative journalists and social media activists. Obviously, we're now aware of big tech and many abuses on search engines and other social media sites. But conservatives certainly have increased their influence and online following to agree that no one could have ever imagined in 1955, the year National Review was founded. Every conceivable conservative publication has a website and is accessible to anyone with a computer, smartphone, or a tablet. As a speaker's prerogative, I'm sure Margie Ross wouldn't mind. I'm going to add one more tidal wave to this list, which would be podcasting. Certainly, there is no shortage of podcasts these days, but conservatives, learning from the influence of talk radio, have taken advantage of the podosphere, as it has certainly democratized the talk radio show and has allowed for basically anyone to start their own program. Some of the top conservative-leaning podcasters include Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Jordan Peterson, Megyn Kelly, Adam Carolla, and many, many more. Some of the top conservative-leaning podcasters include Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Jordan Peterson, Megyn Kelly, Adam Carolla, and many, many more.
Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro in the same sentence. I'm actually not familiar with Adam Carolla. But then, yeah, you got Megyn Kelly and I didn't hear. I don't care about the other one. I'm just... Wow. Ben Shapiro has been name dropped. Okay, this is... Okay. Literally, Pop Culture Geek Paul Love gave us a video in which Ben Shapiro was being grilled by Congress members, was asked explicitly, is he aware of Project 2025? This clown sues people all the time for infringement and all this other crap, as long as it serves its purposes. So you mean to tell me that he gets name dropped twice in one course and isn't aware that he is being venerated in this Project 2025, which probably has hundreds or thousands of students? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So isn't that, I forget the word now, but it's a crime, right? To lie under oath, especially to Congress? Matt Walsh, yeah, right. That washed up scumbag too. The Man Show with Jimmy Kimmel and now spews ignorant trash. I thought he was the Cops host. What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Now we know why Ben Shapiro was... We know why, but he still denied it and lied about it. And instead of, pulling up this... Of course, I guess they didn't sign... I guess if your name was Congressman Swilwell, it would be kind of obvious that you're that guy and not some other... Swilwell. I'm sure that's not a common name. The same Matt Walsh who bashes things he thinks is not manly enough. Adam Carolla was in The Man Show. I vaguely remember hearing something of The Man Show. I vaguely... From 1999? Yeah, I probably watched it as a kid. Building the conservative movement and the philanthropists who made it possible. Tyranny in Fascism, brought to you by these sponsors.
In 1964, Senator Barry Goldwater, the conservative hero from Arizona, would famously win the Republican nomination against New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, who represented the liberal Eastern establishment of the Republican Party.
What? What? Hold on. My ears must have deceived me.
Conservative hero from Arizona would famously win the Republican nomination against New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, who represented the liberal Eastern establishment of the Republican Party. And while
Rockefeller, liberal, Republican Party.
While Goldwater's victory was a recognition that the conservative movement had grown from a nascent movement of ideas into a powerful political force, Lyndon Johnson would handily defeat Goldwater in a huge landslide. But in defeat, Goldwater would become the most consequential loser in modern American history.
The most consequential loser in history. Oh my God. What is the timestamp on that? Okay. Wow.
From the ashes of the Goldwater candidacy, a conservative phoenix rose with a new, smarter, and better organized political conservative movement. The campaign connected conservatives with other conservatives for the first time, neighbor to neighbor, organizer to organizer, from state to state. People started identifying themselves
from sea to shining sea. Eagle in the background.
As conservatives, distinguishing themselves from Republicans. They were aware of and were reading National Review, or had read Goldwater's timeless fusionist book, The Conscience of a Conservative, written in 1960, or Phyllis Schlafly's defense of conservatism in A Choice, Not an Echo, written in 1964. Organizations would begin to pop up across the country to better organize conservatives, recruit conservative candidates, fundraise, advocate on public policy initiatives or referenda.
First of all,
and activate conservative constituencies on election day to get out and vote. A few of these new influential organizations would be the American Conservative Union, founded in 1964, which would eventually host the annual CPAC convention, which is the largest annual conservative
So you're saying it can carry one tune?
gathering. Another group, the Philadelphia Society, founded in 1964, is an organization of movement and civic leaders, academics, journalists, clergy, and business professionals dedicated to the goal of deepening and educating others on the intellectual foundations of conservatism. Another group, the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, founded in 1968, would counter the radical labor movements at the time on a state and national level.
Wow. The National Labor Right to Work movement. If that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about right to work in our country, that it was one of the founding members of the post-Barry Goldwater era of conservatism, yikes. I was not off key. Well, and yeah, yikes.
And Young Americans for Freedom, while founded in 1960, was the only other major young conservative organization on college campuses, aside from ISI, that had reached fever-pitch participation with their help in organizing young conservatives for Goldwater.
Wow.
It should
of
be
course
noted
it
that
does,
the organization
though.
was
Young
founded
men
at
are the most
childhood
influential
Buckley
people.
estate in Sharon, Connecticut.
Influenceable.
And its founding statement of principles, the Sharon Statement, written eloquently by M. Stanton Evans, was a statement clearly outlining conservative principles in a way that was easily understandable to the average person.
Okay. All right. All joking aside, let's hear this part again.
Written eloquently by M. Stanton Evans, was a statement clearly outlining conservative principles in a way that was easily understandable to the average person.
That is what we need to do as a country if we truly are serious about combating this. If you don't want this, then I cannot emphasize enough.
By M. Stanton
then
Evans,
we need
was
to
a
do
statement
this.
Clearly outlining conservative principles in a way that was easily understandable to the average person. The Sharon Statement would inspire a countless number of conservative leaders and would help educate many new conservative voters and activists. Later on, the Young Americas Foundation would oversee Young Americans for Freedom as a part of their successful youth programming, conferences, and initiatives. While we're listing influential organizations, now is probably the time to introduce another important figure in the post-Goldwater era. Next to Bill Buckley, Barry Goldwater, and Ronald Reagan, Paul Weyrich would become one of the most influential and important conservative figures in this era.
I don't think I've heard of him.
Would become a successful conservative movement entrepreneur. Inspired by the Goldwater campaign, Weyrich left his career in journalism and began to work in conservative politics. He's credited with founding or co-founding a number of influential organizations, including the Heritage Foundation, along with Dr. Edwin Fulner and Joseph Coors. The Heritage Foundation, founded in 1973, is the largest and most influential conservative think tank in America, if not the world. Weyrich, Fulner, and Coors believed that a more proactive, fusionist conservative think tank was necessary. Votes took place. The next group was the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, and was also co-founded by Weyrich in 1973.
Wow.
And has been described as a forum for conservative-leaning state legislators and private sector members to collaborate and draft model legislation that members could customize and introduce for debate in their own state legislatures.
Did you hear this? He's literally, again, we want small government. We want limited government. We want people to independently govern themselves, to self-actualize. But we're going to use our think tank, ALEC, to create Mad Libs of legislation so that it can be disseminated at any single level of government to espouse and push out conservative values. Like, again, we aren't being out ideologied in the slightest. We are being out organized. That is what is happening in this country. We are woefully out-organized. The infrastructure, the institutions. If you had asked me 10 minutes ago if the Heritage Foundation was linked to ALEC, which was linked to all of these other conservative think tanks, I would have said no. I would have said no. They're working for common causes, but surely they're not linked together. I mean, that would be like saying the Black Lives Matter is working with Planned Parenthood, right? They're two distinct organizations that have a common cause of equality, but surely they're not actually part of the same core thing. And they are. They are intrinsically connected.
ALEC would provide a great service by helping conservative legislators from all over the country connect and collaborate. The other major group was the Republican Study Committee, which is considered the original U.S. House of Representatives Conservative Caucus, was co-founded by Weyrich as well in 1973. The purpose of the RSC would be to keep watch on the Republican leadership, as they were sometimes viewed as too moderate. Eventually, they would propose their own alternative conservative legislation to rally conservative members of Congress around it. Philanthropists, foundations, and unsung heroes who conservative movement that we know today. I strongly encourage you to read their book, as there are just too many donors and foundations that invested so much into building this movement. I could not possibly name everybody in this presentation.
Which just goes to show that if you invest in these conservative organizations, or if you invest in a political movement, the return on that investment will take billionaires to becoming multi-hundred billionaires, from creating a system to creating a trickle-down system where it only goes up, 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 and up. So again, not only if the left wants to win, let me rephrase. If the left actually wants to win and take control from the conservatives to regain credibility in the eyes of the public, am I seriously going to drop again? I am so sick and tired of this garbage connection, even though I have a LAN cable. Anyway, if leftists or just anti-conservatives truly want to organize and win, the message needs to be created. It needs to be equitable to the Sharon Statement. All right? It needs to be equatable to the Sharon Statement, which means our philosophies and our values need to be digestible by the common citizen, by the regular public. And if we can't do that, we certainly cannot promote this ideology to the people with resources, right? The people that have a vested interest in seeing these things come to fruition. And if we can't do either of those things, we will continue to lose. Straight up. That is what we're up against.
But here are some that I know through reputation, many whom have literally donated hundreds of millions of dollars to conservative scholars, think tanks, publications, and organizations over the years. And again, this is just a personal list that I made myself. Joseph Coors, the Coors beer magnate who helped co-found the Heritage Foundation, as mentioned earlier. Richard Uihlein, founder of Uihlein and heir to the Schlitz brewing fortune. Richard Mellon Scaife and the Scaife Foundations, whose relatives were related to Andrew Mellon. Lynn and Harry Bradley Foundation, the John M. Olin Foundation, Daniel Searle and the Searle Freedom Trust, the DeVos Family Foundation, whose family co-founded Amway, the Van Andel family, who also co-founded Amway, F.M. Kirby Foundation, the Mercer Family Foundation, and Donors Trust. Some other individuals, Bar Said, who is the former owner of Trip Light, Sheldon Adelson, former hotel and casino resort owner, Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal, Charles Schwab, and Bernard Marcus, who is the co-founder of Home Depot. One individual needs special mention here, Richard Viguerie, who has been called the funding father of the conservative movement. Richard Viguerie was a direct mail pioneer who essentially invented direct mail marketing and fundraising for conservative causes and helped fund and educate much of the early conservative movement through his national donor lists and direct marketing campaigns, bypassing the mainstream media, and still does so today with his company American Target Advertising. Many owe their start in politics to him.
What? Oh my God.
Also during this post-Goldwater campaign period, there would emerge two new legs of the proverbial conservative movement stool. As the conservative movement grew and new challenges arrived, so did other strands. Dr. George Nash would categorize the new groups as the neoconservatives and social conservatives. The neoconservatives were former liberals who felt mugged by reality. After many became disillusioned with the new left and their pacifism during the Vietnam War and the 1960s counterculture, many of them found common cause with the burgeoning conservative movement. They're known for their proactive foreign policy stances and hawkish positions, and fit firmly within the anti-communism camp. Domestically, they were much more accepting of the welfare state than their libertarian and traditionalist conservative colleagues, but not as progressive as the New Left. Like the other strands, their thought leaders were often in academia, think tanks, and the media. Conservatives, Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz, and early public supporters would be Democrat Senators Henry Scoop Jackson from Washington State, Daniel Patrick Moynihan from New York State, and Jeane Kirkpatrick, who would serve as UN ambassador for President Reagan. Irving Kristol was known as the godfather of neoconservatism. He was a prolific writer and helped co-found many publications that would promote neoconservative ideas, including co-founding the Public Interest and the National Interest publications, and would later spend much of his career as a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, helping to lead and shape its foreign policy outlook. AEI is one of the oldest and most influential right-leaning think tanks in D.C., primarily focusing on free markets and enterprise and hawkish foreign policy. AEI would soon become associated as the primary think tank home for Commentary magazine for 35 years. Commentary columnists left. Podhoretz is credited for moving the magazine, would serve in high-level positions and drive much of the foreign policy of the George W. Bush administration. In 1995, Irving Kristol's son, Bill Kristol, and colleague Fred Barnes would launch the Weekly Standard, a neoconservative weekly magazine, and it would quickly become the largest circulated magazine on the right next to National Review. Their founding publisher was News Corporation, which was owned by Rupert Murdoch, who also owned Fox News, and many of their writers would serve as commentators on the channel for many years. The other burgeoning group on the right were what Dr. George Nash called the religious right, or who are also known as the social conservative. In response to the infamous Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, the so-called Equal Rights Amendment, and Jimmy Carter's attempted rescission of tax exemptions for non-public schools, a rising faith-based religious right, primarily concerned with culture war issues, would become an indelible force and grassroots bloc of the growing conservative.
Not only are they bragging about neocons, they are elevating them as an actual wing of the conservative movement.
The early influential social conservative organizations started in the 1970s were Eagle Forum, Concerned Women for America, and the Moral Majority, to just name a few. Eagle Forum was founded by conservative heroine Phyllis Schlafly, who was a prolific author and activist. Her best-selling book, A Choice, Not an Echo, written in 1964 in support of Barry Goldwater's presidential campaign about conservatism. Schlafly and Eagle Forum, which had state chapters across the country, are credited for stopping the Equal Rights Amendment in the 1970s, which was believed to be hostile to traditional family values. Concerned Women for America was another organization that launched in 1978 by Beverly LaHaye, whose husband was Tim LaHaye, an evangelical minister and popular author of the Left Behind book series. Like Eagle Forum, they stood against radical feminism, but were much more involved in legislative battles on Capitol Hill. The other influential group was the Moral Majority, founded by Baptist minister Jerry Falwell and Paul Weyrich. And Weyrich was the one who came up with the name Moral Majority. At its peak, it had 4 million members with 20 state chapters and became one of the most influential lobbying groups in the country, and certainly throughout the Reagan presidency. With the addition of both the neoconservatives and social conservatives, the conservative movement seemed healthy as it was attracting more members and influence.
I'm trying to troubleshoot my connection. It could very well be that it's just too hot in my apartment right now, and that it's causing the modem to overheat and all that other fun stuff. So, if that's the case, there's very little that I can do about that. There's very little I can do about that. I'm gonna probably try ordering, I guess, another wall unit, and hopefully it does a job, because yeah, it is pretty rough in here right now. The other thing, though, is they are bragging about neoconservatives. They were literally talking about some extremely right-wing, alt-right, just the not good part of conservatism as part of the overall movement, and that it is an important part of the movement and it serves its purpose. So, just wanted to be clear on that.
The culmination
and the religious
of these five
right,
groups,
exactly,
plus the national infrastructure that had been built since the '64 campaign, was incredibly influential in helping to propel Ronald Reagan to win the Republican nomination and the presidency in 1980. In just 16 years after Goldwater's consequential defeat, conservatives would soon elect its hero, Ronald Reagan. Reagan's presidency was not just a win, but was called a revolution. The Reagan Revolution would be the first fusionist presidency, with Reagan asking representatives from the various conservative groups to serve in his administration. Reagan is credited for fixing our economy from the disastrous Carter-run years, lowering taxes significantly for all Americans, and for devising and implementing a successful strategy to win the Cold War and defeat Soviet communism peacefully. In his inaugural address, Reagan talked about getting government out of the way and restoring the proper balance between the citizen and government, a recognition that since the FDR days, government had grown beyond its constitutional mandates. Conservatives finally had someone in power championing American constitutionalism again. But more than anything else, Reagan brought a sense of mourning in America again. A 1980.
In order to even comment on that statement, we would probably have to stream for the next 3 hours, just going piece by piece into the Reagan administration's activities and how they have all directly contributed to the current state of economic and social affairs, whereby people are suffering egregiously and horrifically because of administrative mandates that can be laid at the feet of Ronald Reagan himself. But according to the conservative movement, he is their Jesus Christ.
For election campaign slogan that signified a new posture for the American people, a new hope, a new confidence, a reminder that America was still that shining city on a hill and did not have to be a nation with a crisis in confidence.
Peacefully ended communism, Reagan was backing death squads in Central America and bombing the crap out of the Middle East. Right. Again, the conservative doesn't care about the truth. The conservative cares about the vision and the message, because now they no longer have to worry about the truth. They no longer have to worry about their rise in power and prominence because they already have it. Now they have to rewrite the past to fit their narrative so they can continue to grow and solidify their power base, which is why we are watching this. We're not watching this because should all convert to conservative ideology. This is an indictment of conservative ideology and how it is intrinsic